In 1863, snow melted on a Gettysburg ravine. There, a soldier's body was found curled beside a velvet-bound Bible. No name inside, no badge, only a silver locket with a lock of dark hair and a threadbare ribbon, whose story was never finished. A Bible without a name, a locket, initials missing, a letter, unsigned. Between 1861 and 1865, more than 2.7 million men fought. Some died in glory, others left only artifacts in mud. When war ended, what names never reached stone? Welcome to history's ledger. Tonight, we do not walk only among muskets and battle flags. We enter the surgeons' tents, the prison camps, the muddy roads where disease traveled faster than bullets. The Civil War killed more than 600,000 men, yet the majority did not fall in the roar of battle. They faded in silence. From fever, from hunger, from infection. Some clutched Bibles bound in velvet, others held silver lockets, their clasps still warm. Many left only initials scratched in diaries, or a letter never opened. This is not just the story of armies clashing, it is the story of absence, of bodies carried to shallow graves, of names crossed out in ledgers, of artifacts that outlasted the men who held them. So let us turn the page. Let us step into the quiet spaces of the war and see what was truly the deadliest enemy of all. It was April 1861. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet earth. Across towns from Maine to Mississippi, boys pressed forward to enlist. They lined up outside courthouses and taverns, hats in hand, boots muddy from farms. Some lied about their age, carving 18 on scraps of paper and slipping them into shoes so they could answer yes, standing literally on the number. More than 400,000 who marched were under 17. At first there was music. Bands played in squares. Mothers wrapped sons in coats, scented of cedar chests. Fathers pressed Bibles into hands, velvet bound, gilt-edged, fragile in tents, but carried anyway. Others carried silver watches, brass pipes, embroidered handkerchiefs, small luxuries against the mud, tokens of home. They sang as they marched, voices uneven, breath white in morning air. Horses filled roads with the smell of leather, drums rattled. Though one soldier recalled, each man in the regiment took a different step. We marched, ran, walked, galloped, and still could not keep time. It looked comic. No one laughed. By summer, tents rose in open fields, white canvas rows, cots with wool blankets, muskets stacked at poles. Fires smoked over salted pork and hardtack, crawling with weevils. Hunger was louder than disgust. At night, lanterns lit letters home. Some wrote on gilt paper, others scraps of brown wrapping. Words pressed carefully, not always true. Warmth written in cold, laughter written in loneliness. Many letters never arrived, wax unbroken. Disease began its march, dysentery, typhoid, pneumonia, invisible armies that did not care about uniforms. Private Theodore Gerish wrote, "The most disastrous feature of the war was the terrible sickness. The whole experience in camp was in direct contrast to home. Luxury lingered even here. A Union officer polished silver buttons each morning. A Confederate boy's Bible softened in the rain, gilt lettering dimming but intact. In a trench, coffee beans were traded for tobacco wrapped in lace. Fragile refinements, absurd, necessary, irreplaceable. By year's end, flags still waved and mothers still cheered, but the truth was already written. Unopened letters, coughing tents, graves dug shallow. The war would not be short. It would consume 4 years, and more than 600,000 lives. Many left no stone, no name, only a locket, a ribbon, a velvet Bible with no inscription. By the end of 1861, fields were lined with white canvas, tents marked in chalk, cots stacked with wool blankets from home, muskets leaning outside. Fires smoked low, filling the air with salt pork, damp wood, and sweat. At dawn, bugles called. Men stumbled out, shoulders sore, boots stiff. Some wore coats their mothers had sewn, still faint with cedar scent. Others were mismatched, blue trousers with grey jackets, patched militia coats that barely held together. Disease was waiting. It lived in water, mud, and food. Dysentery, typhoid, pneumonia, malaria. By 1862, sickness killed more than bullets. Half a regiment might be unfit for duty. Gerish of the 20th Maine called it the most disastrous feature of the war. Tents filled not with fighting men, but with coughing, groaning boys. Food deepened misery. Hardtack biscuits, often crawling with weevils, were eaten in silence. Confederates scraped meals from cornmeal, molasses, roasted acorns. Hunger blurred enmity. Coffee traded for tobacco, apples for corn. For a moment, survival mattered more than uniforms. Luxury flickered stubbornly. An officer insisted on china plates, chipped but gleaming. A Pennsylvania captain carried silver cutlery wrapped in cloth. Confederate officers smoked ivory-tipped pipes. Soldiers still wound engraved pocket watches by candlelight, listening to the faint tick like a heartbeat from home. Drill filled hours between sickness and meals. Lines of men marched, rifles on shoulders, dust rising. Each man took a different step, Gerish wrote. 1,000 men out of rhythm, strange, almost comic. But no one laughed. Nights fell heavy. Lanterns glowed in tents. Men bent over paper, writing to wives and mothers. Some on gilt-edged stationery, some on scraps of wrapping paper. I am well. I eat my fill. I hope to return before winter. Many lied. Many letters never returned. Wax unbroken. Names already erased. Snow pressed against tents that December. Fence rails burned for warmth. Inside, fevers burned hotter than fires. Some soldiers prayed over velvet Bibles. Others clutched silver lockets that glinted faintly in the dark. Camp life was mud, hunger, sickness, and fragile objects of refinement held against it. The war had barely begun, yet already the unopened letters and coughing tents whispered its truth. The musket was a burden before it was a weapon, a Springfield, nearly 10 pounds of iron and wood, carving grooves into a boy's shoulder. In camp, it was polished daily, stacked in pyramids outside tents. Soldiers treated it like a second body, always near, always waiting. In battle, it became punishment. A practiced man fired once every 20 seconds, powder torn with teeth, ball rammed down, flint sparking. The recoil slammed into bone, leaving arms dark with bruises. Sam Watkins of Tennessee remembered, "I fired 120 times that day. My arm was bruised to the shoulder, too sore to hold a musket. The smoke was worse than the recoil. After the first volley, black powder filled the air. Men fired blind, choking on sulfur." Charles Carroll Morey, a Union captain, wrote, "A bullet nearly found my face. I dropped, heard the whistle passed, then finished reloading. Even near death was no excuse to stop. The bayonet, a triangular blade, hung heavy on the muzzle. Few charges ever struck home, but its gleam in smoke was terror enough. Some men woke from dreams, swearing they still saw the flash of steel. Luxury intruded even in mud. Officers carried gilded swords, polished scabbards glinting against dirt. Powder flasks bore monograms. Revolvers with ivory grips carried initials from home. They killed no better than plain iron, but they whispered of refinement, civilization carried into chaos. By early 1862, the toll was visible. Arms purple, ears ringing, throats raw from powder smoke. Muskets cracked, bayonets bent, powder horns abandoned in mud. Letters home still spoke of glory, but the artifacts, bruised weapons, shattered steel, monogrammed flasks, half buried in blood-soaked fields, told another story. The musket bruised as much as it killed. The smoke blinded as much as it shielded. The bayonet frightened more than it struck, and the body always paid the price. The first thing a soldier noticed was the smell. Not blood, not mud, but chloroform, sharp and sweet, hanging heavy. By 1862, surgeons' tents were their own battlefields. Canvas flapped in wind, lanterns glowed yellow through stained cloth. Outside, groans. Inside, sawdust soaked with iron and sweat. A musket ball did not cut clean. It shattered. Bones splintered, flesh torn. The surgeon had one choice: cut quickly. Amputation was survival. 10 minutes with knife and saw, skin, bone, linen bandage tied fast, already red before the knot was pulled. Luxury sat beside ruin. Scalpels with silver handles, bone saws polished like mirrors, chloroform bottles of cut glass stoppered with brass. A gold ring slipped from a finger before the cut. Buttons, silver, brass, mother of pearl, piled beside bloody cloth. Refinement stripped away to make room for steel. Most surgeons had been country doctors. Now they cut for hours while screams split the canvas. Some steadied themselves with ivory pipes or engraved flasks between procedures, small rituals against horror. Ether, when available, dulled pain. More often, chloroform was pressed to a rag. Men slipped into half-consciousness, thrashing as saws rasped bone. Outside, piles of limbs grew high, boots still on, spurs glinting faintly in sun. Nurse Mary Finney von Olnhausen called it a sacrifice to some bloody god. Artifacts carried dignity when bodies could not. A silver watch ticking in a pocket, even as the arm beside it was gone. An embroidered handkerchief tied around a stump as a bandage. A Bible with gilt velvet cover stained through with blood. Doctors wrote of the smell that never left them. Iron, sweat, chloroform. Even survivors carried it home. Men marched again with crutches, wrote with left hands, smoked pipes with one arm. Some draped watch chains across empty sleeves, clinging to fragments of gentility. But many never walked back out. Their names entered in surgeons' logs, their bodies buried in nearby fields. Sometimes not even a name, only a locket, a ribbon, a velvet Bible carried in and carried no further. By the end of 1862, tens of thousands of amputations had been done. Some lived, many did not. The surgeon's tent was not glory, it was necessity. Its ledger written in silver instruments, linen bandages, and silence. The bullet was not the greatest killer, it was disease. By winter 1862, sickness spread faster than cavalry. It whispered in wells and rivers, in bread baked black with insects. Dysentery, typhoid, pneumonia, malaria. A boy could survive a musket ball, even a surgeon saw, but not the water. At one Potomac camp, men drank from puddles trodden by horses. Within days, half the regiment lay curled in fever. A soldier from Ohio wrote, "The diarrhea carries off more men than the fight. The whole camp shakes with cough." Luxury offered little defense. Velvet Bibles sweated in trembling hands. Silver chains ticked faintly against fevered chests. Men muttered prayers, kissed lockets, tore blankets embroidered with initials, and still slipped away. Typhoid twisted the mind. Men spoke to mothers not there, pressed cracked lips against lockets, clawed linen until it ripped. Dysentery stripped dignity. Soldiers crouching in mud-stained trousers, grey-faced, dying more quietly than on any battlefield. The numbers dwarfed combat. For every soldier killed in action, 2 more died of disease. By war's end, more than 400,000. Doctors tried. Lancets bled patients. Calomel poisoned with mercury. Opium dulled pain. Quinine battled fever. A Confederate nurse confessed, "We gave powders. We prayed. Still they slipped away, like smoke out of the chimney. Luxury persisted in the ruins. A silk handkerchief folded across a chest. A silver button cut before burial. A gilt Bible closed and placed in cold hands. Objects endured where breath did not. Mystery followed. Letters written but never sent. Roll calls unanswered. In Sharpsburg, years later, a tin box was found. Inside, a prayer card and a linen scrap marked J, first miss. No stone ever bore his name. By 1862, soldiers understood the truth. War's deadliest enemy was not the bayonet nor the bullet, but fever, flux, and silence. The soldier's night often began with silence. A lantern hissed inside a tent, canvas glowing faint. Outside, coughs, horses shifting, boots in mud. Inside, paper, ink, a hand trying to bridge distance. Letters were lifelines. Some written on gilt-edged stationery folded from trunks, others on scraps of wrapping paper or torn account sheets. Whatever could hold ink carried hope. A Union private wrote his wife, "Do not fret. I am well and safe." His regiment was sick with dysentery. He lied for love. A Confederate boy scribbled, "Tell mother I sleep warm. Tell her I eat my fill." His coat was threadbare, his belly empty. Luxury marked even these scraps. Silver inkstands, embossed seals, ribbons tied around folded pages. Some paper faint with perfume from a sweetheart's last gift. Intense, stinking of smoke and sweat, these fragments seemed almost miraculous. At home, letters became relics before their writers were gone. A wife read her husband's note until ink blurred with tears. A mother in Georgia carried a son's last line folded into her apron. Children slept with envelopes beneath pillows, but many never arrived. Mail bags burned in raids, wagons overturned into swamps, envelopes returned unopened, wax still sealed, names already erased. A widow in Massachusetts received her husband's letter weeks after he died at Antietam. Her reply came back stamped, "Deceased." Bundles of letters were found on the dead. A boy at Gettysburg carried a packet tied with ribbon, one note reading, "If I fall, know that I thought of you." She never read it. Rain blurred the ink, ribbon rotted, words lost. Mystery lingers in what never opened. At Sharpsburg, a tin box unearthed decades later held a browned love letter, unsigned, a prayer card, and a scrap of linen marked J, first miss. Too fragile to unfold, the words inside still silent. William Child wrote, "We read and write letters all the time, in every place. We read, then read again, then place them next to the heart." Captain Charles Morey admitted, "There are hours when I write only to convince myself I still exist." Luxury met ruin again and again. A gilt-edged letter pierced by musket ball, blood mixing with gold. a silver locket tied to an envelope, initials fading. A watch stopped at midnight beside a note marked only "Remember me." Letters were proof of life. When they stopped arriving, silence itself became the message. War was not only rifles and bayonets, it was sound. In 1861, when regiments formed across the states, boys too young for muskets found another way to serve. They carried drums, they carried bugles, they carried the rhythm of war. Drummers set the pace. Buglers called reveille at dawn, sounded advance in battle, and taps at night. Some were children no older than 12. John Clem, later called the drummer boy of Chickamauga, marched with the 22nd Michigan, first with a drum, then a musket cut down to his size. He was one of more than 100,000 underage boys who served. Some beat cadences, some carried rifles, some ran with messages across fields. The sound of drums rolled through camps each morning, bugles piercing the air with brass notes. Soldiers rose to sound, not clocks. The bugle was time itself. At dusk, taps drifted across tents, the last note fading into mist. Luxury clung even to these instruments. Imported French drums painted red and blue, silver mouthpieces etched with initials, calfskin heads polished with oil, bugles engraved, drums bound in bright hoops. A boy, too small for his uniform, carried a horn, fitted with a pearl inlay, absurd and delicate against the smoke of battle. But sound made them targets. Drummers and buglers stood out in smoke. Rifles searched for their rhythm. At Antietam, one boy recalled striking harder, so the beat carried over gunfire, his hands raw and slick with sweat. Buglers marked movements with notes that gleamed like silver, but each blast risked a bullet. Artifacts tell their silence now, a shattered drum preserved in Gettysburg's museum, its skin torn where a musket ball struck, a dented bugle unearthed in a barn loft, others buried with boys too small for muskets, but too proud to leave the line. Mystery lingers in fragments. At Shiloh, a bugle was dug from the earth, inscribed only with the letter H. No regiment, no name. Just an initial scratched into brass. The boy who blew it lost a record. Even so, when air moves through the horn today, the note still comes, faint, wavering, like a voice returning from the silence. A soldier's war was not fought only in battlefields. It was fought on the road. Union regiments marched 10 to 15 miles a day, sometimes 20, even 30. Roads were dust in summer, mud in spring, ice in winter. It clung to boots, bent spines, filled mouths. Men rode of their feet more than their rifles. Boots blistered, socks tore, nails blackened and fell away. One Indiana private recalled marching until the skin peeled from his heels, blood marking the snow. A Confederate remembered, each step was a punishment. I thought less of the enemy than of my feet. Luxury appeared even here. An officer rode with a velvet-lined saddle, while men stumbled beside him. A captain carried a silver-headed cane, tapping it on the road, though his soldiers leaned on branches. Some wiped sweat with handkerchiefs embroidered in silk, cloths soon blackened with dust. The sound of a march was relentless, leather straps creaking, tin cups rattling, canteens clinking, boots dragging in mud. Songs sometimes filled the gaps. John Brown's Body, Dixie, old hymns. By dusk, silence marched louder than music. Objects were abandoned when weight grew unbearable. At Fredericksburg, retreating roads were littered with blankets, rifles, even pocket watches engraved with initials. Charles Hayden of Michigan wrote, "The road is paved with relics of exhaustion. Coats, shoes, letters torn and thrown away. Some of those letters were later found half-burned, ink blurred, names unreadable. Hunger shadowed every step. Hardtack broken on rifle butts. Bacon rancid but eaten anyway. Confederates chewed parched corn until their teeth cracked. At Gettysburg, Union troops marched 30 miles in 2 days under blistering heat, lips split, tongues swelling, men drinking from ditches. Some collapsed before battle began. Luxury lingered among ruin. A china teacup wrapped in cloth, shattered on the road near Chancellorsville. A silver belt buckle gleaming in Chickamauga mud. A gilt-edged Bible found at Spotsylvania, lying open in rain, its name washed away. The march was survival by inches. Men joked it was worse than the fight. Then they stopped joking. They simply walked, step after step, day after day, until boots wore through and names slipped quietly from the ledges. Night fell hard on the camps, rifles stacked in pyramids. Fires burned low, and in the dark, music began. Sometimes it was one voice humming a hymn from home. Sometimes a dozen gathered by the fire, boots off, blistered feet steaming in the glow. Songs carried through the tents. Home, sweet home. Lorena, nearer my God to thee. That last ballad was so beloved in Confederate camps that Union generals tried to ban it, fearing it sapped morale. Still, men sang. One Georgian recalled, "When we sang Lorena, I thought the whole camp was in tears. Even the officers turned away. Across lines, the sound traveled further than they knew. Union soldiers picked up the same chorus. For a moment, enemies shared a song in the night. Luxury flickered in the music. Banjos with carved inlays, guitars from parlors at home, a mandolin with mother-of-pearl pegs glowing by lantern light. Bugles sometimes disobeyed orders of silence, brass gleaming faintly as they played soft tunes against the dark. The night camp was ritual as much as song. Fires snapped, tin cups clinked with coffee or chicory, smoke thick with sweat and boiling grounds. Men carved spoons, played cards by lamplight, scribbled letters on scraps of paper. Others simply stared at embers, lips moving in prayers. No one could hear. Mystery lingers strongest in silence. a Union soldier at Gettysburg wrote, "I heard a song that stopped me, a voice so clear, so lonesome. By morning he was gone. The diary survives, the singer has no stone. Artifacts echo the night still. A pocket watch cracked, but still ticking, found under an old fire pit. A tin cup fused with candle stub. Letters half burned in camp ash, one reading only, I dream of. Nothing more. Silence returned after songs faded. Coughs, groans, restless shifting. Horses stamping in the dark. A nurse in Richmond confessed, the nights are the worst. The men sing, then they cough, then they fall silent. I feel death pressing closer than the canvas walls. Even here, luxury lingered. Silk handkerchiefs pressed over mouths to catch blood. A gold locket faintly shining by firelight. Silver cufflinks laid beside a cot, though their owner was already delirious. Objects of refinement whispering against ruin. Music reminded them of home. Silence reminded them of war. The night camp was where men carried both. Winter came like another enemy. It did not charge with bayonets. It crept into bone, pressed against canvas, silenced whole regiments with frost. By December 1862, both armies dug into winter quarters. At Falmouth, Virginia, Union soldiers cut down forests, stacking logs into huts, patching gaps with mud. Chimneys smoked with green pine. Across Richmond, Confederates did the same. One officer wrote, "We became woodsmen. Our rifles set aside, our hands took up the axe. The huts were small, 10 by 12 feet, roofs leaking, floors frozen when water seeped up. But they were warmer than tents. We lived like groundhogs," a soldier from Maine recalled. "Our chimneys smoked, our roofs dripped, our feet froze. But we were alive. Luxury intruded even here. Carpets stripped from parlors lined dirt floors. Gilt mirrors cracked but still catching firelight. One hut held a piano dragged from a Virginia home, played until the strings snapped. Officers dined with china plates and silver forks laid on rough pine. Soldiers carved candlesticks from bone, polished until they gleamed like ivory. The smell of camps was its own memory. Smoke from green wood, damp wool steaming, bacon frying when rations allowed. Nights long, winds rattling logs, rats scratching across floors. Candles burned low, wax dripping onto pine tables. Men passed hours with stories, carving pipes, playing cards, writing letters. The words were often the same. I am warm. I am well. I will come home. Truth was different. Frostbite blackened toes. Pneumonia stole breath. Fevers lingered. Mystery lingers in the remains. When Union huts at Falmouth were abandoned, archaeologists later uncovered relics. A bent silver spoon engraved with initials, a cigar case of mother of pearl, a polished button hidden in dirt. Another hut yielded a pocket watch stopped at midnight, wedged between logs, its owner unknown. The soldiers endured. They cut wood, wrote letters, prayed by candlelight. They dreamed of spring. One private admitted, "The days run like water. We rise, we eat, we cut wood, we sleep. We do not speak of battles. We wait." Winter was silence stretched long, no flags waving, no drums rolling, only smoke rising against grey sky, cabins of mud and wood holding frost, fire and absence. The battlefield never forgot. Even after soldiers left, the ground kept its own ledger. At Antietam, September 17th, 1862, the bloodiest single day in American history. Farmers plowing struck iron and brass instead of stone. Bayonets, bullets, and buttons surfaced in furrows. One Maryland farmer wrote, "Every furrow tells a story. Every field has a voice." At Gettysburg, civilians scavenged shoes, blankets, muskets. But many objects sank into mud and stayed. Decades later, workmen digging foundations on Seminary Ridge uncovered cartridges, buttons, even a Bible bound in velvet, its gilt edges dulled, the name inside erased. Shiloh yielded silver belt buckles. Chickamauga gave pocket watches stopped in battle. Fredericksburg's trenches still held fragments of china from officers' tables. Luxury cracked and broken, but preserved by earth. Archaeologists of the 20th century found more. At Cold Harbor, tin cups fused with bullets. At Petersburg, a silver locket with the lock of hair still shut. At Sharpsburg, a tin box with a love letter, unsigned, beside a linen scrap marked J, First Miss. Eyewitnesses told the first accounts. Samuel Cormany wrote, after Gettysburg, "I walked among the dead. I saw watches, rings, letters. Some I picked up, some I left. I could not carry all their lives." A Confederate nurse near Manassas remembered. The fields shone with buttons. The sun struck them like stars. Luxury persisted even in ruin. A gilded sword hilt buried in mud. A mother-of-pearl pipe cracked but recognizable. A gold officer's ring cut from a hand before burial. Fragments of perfumed stationery still faintly scented decades later. Mystery deepens in initials. Who was J of the 1st Mississippi? Whose watch stopped at midnight at Chickamauga? Whose locket never opened again? The land itself became a museum without labels. Only artifacts, only silence. By the end of the war, every battlefield held its own archive, not written in ink, but in iron, brass, silver, and bone. The Civil War was a war for freedom, but freedom was not given. It was seized, often by those with the least to lose. By 1863, African American men, many formerly enslaved, began filling Union ranks. By war's end, nearly 180,000 had served, another 20,000 in the Navy. Their courage is recorded, but their names too often silenced. At first, they were turned away. In 1861 to 62, free black men who tried to enlist were told it was a white man's fight. In Philadelphia, Robert Smalls, later famous for seizing the Confederate ship Planter, was rejected. His defiance forced reconsideration. The Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, opened the door. Regiments formed: the 54th Massachusetts, the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry, the 8th U.S. Colored Troops. They marched in blue but were paid less, tasked with fatigue duty, and denied shoes or blankets. Luxury appeared in fragments of dignity. Some carried Bibles bound in velvet, gifts from abolitionist societies. Others wore photographs in silver lockets or medals of brass and bone. In camps, embossed stationery from Boston abolitionists reminded them their fight was watched. The 54th Massachusetts became legend at Fort Wagner, July 1863. Colonel Robert Gould Shaw fell leading his men. Nearly half were killed or captured. Confederates buried Shaw with his soldiers to insult him. His family called it honor. Yet many of those men were reduced in records to colored unknown. In USCT rolls, pages bore only smudges or X's. Entire companies disappeared into fragments of ink. Artifacts whisper where ledgers failed. At Louisiana, a Bugles-stamped USCT was unearthed, its soldier unnamed. At Petersburg, a velvet Bible surfaced, first page inscribed only, "To my son, fight well," no name. In Tennessee, a silver watch engraved CW was recovered. No man in the rolls bore the initials, luxury and contradiction. They fought for liberty but were paid less. They stormed trenches yet were denied boots. Still, they fought. At Milliken's Bend in June 1863, underarmed black troops met a Confederate charge. A Union officer wrote, "The men fought like tigers." Sergeant William Carney of the 54th carried the flag at Wagner, wounded twice, and planted it on the parapet. The old flag never touched the ground. He received a Medal of Honor decades later. Private Nimrod Burke of the 23rd USCT wrote, "I fight for those who come after me. My children shall not be bound." But for every Carney or Burke, hundreds left no diary, no stone, no full name. Mystery sharpens in cemeteries. Rose in Beaufort, South Carolina, marked only unknown USCT headstones at Arlington, bearing nothing more than Jacob, Samuel, Isaac. Imagine the camp of the 54th at dusk. Smoke from fires drifting, the sound of hymns rising. Steal away to Jesus. Blue coats, meager rations, pockets still holding velvet Bibles, lockets, or watches. By dawn, some of those objects lay in sand at Wagner. By night, many were buried in mass graves. The ledgers wrote fragments. The artifacts spoke louder. The silence finished the story. The battlefield was not the only place men died. For thousands, the war began again behind fences, under guard towers, inside hunger. By 1864, prisoner exchanges had collapsed. Captured men crowded into makeshift prisons where life became another war. The most infamous was Andersonville, Georgia. Camp Sumter opened February 1864. By August, more than 30,000 Union soldiers were crammed inside 26 acres. No barracks, no roofs, only earthworks and scraps of tents. Men dug holes in the ground, drank from the same stream they used as latrine. It ran black. The stench carried miles. Union prisoner Robert Kellogg wrote, "Here our men were herded like cattle, naked, sick, starving, dying at the rate of 100 a day. By war's end, nearly 13,000 of 45,000 held there had died. Luxury was almost unimaginable, yet fragments appeared. One man hid a silver watch in his coat lining, its tick faint in silence. Another carried a velvet Bible, gilt lettering smudged with filth. Some carved chessmen from bones, polishing them until they gleamed like ivory, acts of defiance against degradation. Mystery lingers in relics, a button marked First Mass. Uncovered near the stockade wall, the soldier unknown. A locket with initials EW found in the soil. No man of those letters in the rolls. Objects preserved, names erased. The North held its own prisons. At Elmira, New York, more than 12,000 Confederates endured brutal winter. Blankets were thin, river water fouled, disease constant. Of the 12,000, nearly 3,000 died. One prisoner remembered, the snow lay thick. Our blankets were thin. We buried our own. Luxury surfaced here too. A fiddle carved from scraps, strung with silver wire. Letters written on fine embossed paper sent by Southern wives. A pipe with an ivory tip, traded puff by puff for bread. In a burial trench, archaeologists later found a plain gold ring, cut from a finger before interment, still gleaming. Other camps repeated the story. Point Lookout in Maryland, Rock Island in Illinois, Belle Isle in Richmond. Each became its own ledger of starvation. Each left names unfinished. In 1897, workmen digging near Elmira uncovered a small tin. Inside lay a half-burned letter, "To my dearest," then ash, no signature. At Andersonville, relic hunters later found a Bible fragment, velvet cover charred, first page inscribed only, J. Luxury in prisons was paradox. A velvet Bible beside a starving man, a silver watch beside one too weak to walk, a gold ring buried in a trench of hundreds. The battlefield killed quickly, the prison camp killed slowly. Both left ledgers in silence. The battlefield did not end with the volley. It continued in the hospitals. Tents stretched wide across fields, barns commandeered, churches emptied of pews. The smell reached before the sight. Chloroform's sweetness, iron's tang, the heavy rot of wounds left too long. A soldier who survived the bullet was carried here, and here his fate was decided. At Antietam, the Dunker Church became a hospital. Its whitewashed walls turned red, blood pooling where sermons once rang. Gettysburg barns became surgery halls. Kitchens turned into bandage rooms. Clara Barton moved among cots, skirts dark with blood. Amputation was survival. Knife through skin, saw through bone, linen tied tight. 10 minutes and done. A Maine soldier recalled, I heard the saw against bone. I thought it a rasp against wood. Only when the limb fell did I know it was my comrade. Luxury intruded even in ruin. Scalpels with silver handles, saws with polished brass grips, chloroform bottles of cut crystal, officers' rings cut from fingers, slipped into pouches to be sent home, Bibles bound in gilt velvet stained through with blood, silk handkerchiefs tied around stumps as bandages, refinement laid beside ruin. Outside, piles of limbs grew high, boots still on, spurs glinting faintly. Nurse Mary Finney von Olnhausen called it a sacrifice to some bloody god. Mystery scattered in fragments. A pocket watch stopped at midnight, chain broken in the mud. A locket on a table, initials blurred by blood. A letter smudged and unfinished. Dearest, then silence. Doctors were often boys themselves. Country physicians turned battlefield surgeons. They cut with knives grown dull, washed instruments in water, sometimes not at all. Infections swept camps. Gangrene blackened wounds, the smell lingering thicker than smoke. A Fredericksburg surgeon admitted, we cut until the saws bent. We stitched until our hands failed. Luxury sometimes softened the horror. A chaplain held a gilt Bible, reading psalms to the dying. A nurse pressed a perfumed handkerchief to her face, lavender strange against iron. One soldier stared at a portrait in a silver case as the saw began. Hospitals became ledgers. Every cot, an entry. Every amputation, a line. Some written in ink, most in blood. By war's end, more than 60,000 amputations had been performed. Some men lived, many did not. The objects endured, the names often did not. The Civil War was fought by men, but carried also by boys. When the drums first beat in 1861, thousands rushed to join. Some lied about their age, others followed fathers or brothers. More than 400,000 underage boys served. Some drummed or sounded bugles. Some hauled water or stretchers. Some, far too young, carried muskets. John Clem became the most famous, only 12 when he joined the 22nd Michigan. At Chickamauga in 1863, he fired a musket cut down to his size, felling a Confederate officer who demanded his surrender. The drummer boy of Chickamauga lived. Thousands of others never left names. Luxury revealed their fragility. Drumsticks polished smooth, bugles with silver mouthpieces, uniforms cut down and rolled. One drum in Gettysburg's museum still bears faint gilt paint, its calfskin head cracked by rain. At Shiloh, a bugle was dug from the ground, marked only H, no regiment, no name. These children carried rhythm and messages as much as arms. At Antietam, one drummer recalled striking harder so his beat carried through gunfire, hands raw with blood. Runners dashed through woods with notes clutched in fists. A boy of 14 was found by a fence in Virginia, satchel holding a slip. Advance at dawn, the ink blurred by rain, luxury and ruin crossed again. A handkerchief embroidered in blue silk tied around a boy's wrist at Fredericksburg. A pocket watch too large for its owner stopped at the hour of Antietam's climax. A velvet Bible found in Tennessee, gilt edges dulled, ribbon marking Psalm 23 in a child's hand. Census records later disguised many of them as men. Muster rolls listed ages as 18 or 19. The artifacts told another story. Boots too small, drums miniature, jackets scarcely reaching the waist. Mystery lingers strongest in fragments. At Sharpsburg, a child's shoe was unearthed beside a faded ribbon embroidered with J. At Chickamauga, a miniature drumhead torn from its frame. Museum labels read only, owner unknown. When drummer boys died, silence struck harder than the beat. Soldiers wrote that camps seemed hollow, marches unsteady, bugles muted. A Union veteran remembered, when our drummer fell, the fire burned and voices spoke, but something was gone. The Civil War consumed 620,000 lives, among them tens of thousands of children, their names often erased, their presence remembered only by fragile instruments, silk ribbons, and unfinished songs. War was fought not only with rifles, but with coin. Every soldier lived by numbers, wages per month, rations by the ounce, debts carried home. The ledgers of war were not only names of the dead, but columns of pay and food. At the start, a Union private earned $13 a month, officers far more. Confederate pay collapsed quickly. By 1865, their paper money was nearly worthless. Black soldiers of the U.S. colored troops were paid less still, $10 a month with $3 deducted for clothing. Not until 1864 did Congress grant equal pay. Pay often arrived late or never. Soldiers begged families for money. At home, wives pawned silver, mothers sold furniture, brooches, even wedding rings. Luxury objects became survival, candlesticks for flour, Bibles for candles. Rations became their own economy. Union soldiers were promised pork, flour, beans, coffee. Most got hardtack, rock-hard biscuits often alive with weevils. Confederates survived on cornmeal, rice, molasses, and whatever they foraged. Coffee became treasure. Men brewed acorns, rye, chicory to imitate it. Union and Confederate soldiers sometimes traded across picket lines, coffee for tobacco, apples for corn. Luxury clung to the simplest meals. A silver spoon dipped into black coffee, a china teacup carried from home, chipped but still used, pewter flask tied with ribbon, filled with molasses or spirits. Officers dined with napkins embroidered in silk, even as men gnawed rancid bacon beside them. Mystery lingers in ration records. At Andersonville, cornmeal was listed for men already dead. At Elmira, names vanished from burial lists, though rations remained assigned. Did food go elsewhere? Did names slip from ledgers? The ink never explains. Soldiers bartered constantly, coffee for sugar, tobacco for buttons, buttons for boots. Diaries note trades across battle lines, laughter shared before rifles resumed. Artifacts hold proof. A Confederate button buried beside a Union coin. A tin cup scratched with initials from both sides. A brass inlaid pipe traded for coffee. War's costs stretched into homes. Families cut gowns into uniforms, boiled leather for broth, rioted for bread. In Richmond, a widow pawned her wedding ring for cornmeal. In Pennsylvania, another sold her husband's Bible. Both objects survived decades later, inscriptions intact, names still visible, while the families who sold them faded from records. The ledgers kept wages and rations. The artifacts remembered hunger, and silence remembered the names that vanished from both. The war was carried not only by men in blue and grey, but by the wives who waited, the mothers who wept, and the children who lived in silence. When fathers and sons marched away, doors closed and households shifted. Children waved until their arms ached. Mothers pressed Bibles into hands. Wives slipped notes into pockets. Then quiet settled, heavy and strange. A Massachusetts widow wrote, "My children ask each day when father returns. I cannot answer. I tell them he writes, he fights, he prays. But I cannot tell them what I fear." In Virginia, a mother recorded, "The farm lies heavy. My boys are gone. My husband gone. I turn soil alone. The nights are long with only the children's breathing in the dark." Luxury was often sacrificed first. A piano sold to pay rent. Silver candlesticks pawned for flour. A gold brooch traded for medicine. Yet some objects were kept at all costs. A gilt Bible opened nightly. A framed portrait carried from mantle to bedside. A locket with hair tied in ribbon, kissed each morning. Letters were lifelines. Wives wrote daily. Children scrawled crooked lines. Some letters arrived, others did not. Wagons overturned, raiders burned mail, houses emptied before envelopes reached them. An envelope found years later in Pennsylvania bore only, "To Father." Inside was the child's drawing of a house. The family was gone by the time it arrived. Absence was also public. Women wore mourning brooches of jet. Children dressed in ribbons of black. Churches rang bells each Sunday, not for weddings or christenings, but for lists of the dead. Desperation sometimes broke into riot. In Richmond in 1863, women stormed shops demanding flour, carrying axes and pistols. In New York that same year, draft riots burned neighborhoods. Black families were hunted in violence born of poverty and fear. Even here, luxury fragments clung. A silver spoon offered in barter, a locket dropped in chaos, a child's shoe with ribbon pulled from ashes. Children themselves carried absence. They kept chairs empty at tables, carried chores too heavy, whispered prayers at night. One Ohio girl, aged 12, wrote, "I keep his chair at table. It waits. I pray he will sit again." He never did. Census records after the war are filled with fragments: widow, father absent. Objects again fill the silences. A Bible inscribed to William with love, sold to buy candles. A cracked portrait case. A trunk of unanswered letters left in an attic. Imagine the home in 1863, a mother mending by candlelight, children asleep nearby, a letter unfolded until ink fades, a locket beside it, a lock of hair bound in ribbon, the fire low, the silence louder than words. The children of the ledger did not march, did not fight, but bore the war in hunger, in empty places at the table, in letters that stopped arriving. Their names rarely appear in histories, but their absence fills every page. The guns went silent in April 1865, but the war did not end. It lingered in bodies, in homes, in dreams. Armies disbanded. Men walked home barefoot, limping, or carried in wagons. They opened doors to houses changed by absence. They sat at tables where chairs had been filled in their stead. The war followed them into that silence. The wounds were not all visible. Some men returned without arms or eyes. Others carried scars the eye could not see. Newspapers called it soldier's heart. Physicians called it nostalgia. Today, it is named post-traumatic stress. A Union veteran wrote, "I hear bullets when none are fired. My wife cannot wake me from dreams." A Confederate admitted, "The screams return in sleep. I sit by the fire until dawn." Luxury objects often revealed fractures. Pocket watches wound each night, but never read, ticking endlessly beside sleepless men. Portrait cases clutched so tightly their glass cracked. Lockets worn by widows. The men they held never returned. Families felt it too. Wives remembered husbands who startled at thunder. Children grew in homes where silence was heavier than speech. Soldiers' homes sprang up across the Union, sanctuaries for men who could not return to farms or trades. Relics remain from those places. Pipes carved from bone, initials etched restlessly. Silver-tipped canes gifted to men who would never march again. Luxury also lingered in public commemorations. Northern cities held grand balls with gilt invitations, chandeliers glowing over veterans who walked with crutches. Silver cutlery gleamed at tables where some hands could no longer lift a fork. Splendor above, silence below. Cemeteries kept the contradiction. rows of stones marked unknown. Arlington, Gettysburg, Andersonville, thousands of graves without names. Some markers bore only numbers. Artifacts told what stones could not. A watch stopped at midnight. A locket with initials blurred. A velvet Bible scorched but still legible. The war had ended, yet its ledger remained open, written in objects, in absences, in silence. The war ended in 1865, but the ground did not forget. It remembered in iron, brass, silver, and bone. For decades, farmers plowing struck more than stone. Blades turned up bullets flattened by bone, rusted bayonets, buttons gleaming faint after rain. Children collected mini balls as toys. Families stored cannonballs in barns. The war lay inches beneath their feet. At Antietam, plowmen uncovered knives and bandages black with age. Gettysburg fields yielded muskets still loaded, powder dry after a century. At Shiloh, silver spoons engraved with initials surfaced in cornrows. Chickamauga gave watches stopped at midnight, chains broken in the mud. Fredericksburg trenches revealed shattered china from officers' tables. Archaeologists later unearthed more. At Cold Harbor, tin cups fused with bullets. At Petersburg, a silver locket with a lock of hair still inside. At Sharpsburg, a tin box with an unsigned love letter beside a linen scrap marked J, First Miss. Luxury endured even in fragments. A mother of pearl pipe, cracked but polished. A gold ring cut from a hand at Chickamauga. A crystal decanter shattered in Fredericksburg rubble. Perfumed stationery pressed into earth, faint scent surviving decades. Mystery sharpened in initials. Who was J of Mississippi? Who scratched only H into a bugle at Shiloh? Whose watch ticked last at midnight? Farmers told their own tales, bullets striking plows like hail. A child blowing a recovered bugle, its note carrying over fields once filled with smoke. Was it sound, or memory refusing silence? Museums now hold many relics, buttons bright as stars, cartridges black with powder, letters half burned, folded, unread. Labels repeat, owner unknown. A watch tells time, but not whose pocket it warmed. A Bible bears words, but not whose hands turned pages. A spoon carries initials, but not the lips it fed. The ground became its own archive. Every artifact, a fragment. Every silence, a record. In 1863, snow melted in a ravine near Gettysburg. A body was found curled against the earth. Beside him, a musket, a velvet-bound Bible with gilt edges stained, a silver locket holding a curl of dark hair, and a ribbon embroidered with a single letter, J. The record kept nothing more. No badge, no inscription, no name. The locket is not unique. Thousands carried them. But this one endures because it asks questions that cannot be answered. Whose hair was inside? A wife? A sister? Whose hand stitched the ribbon? whose lips whispered the name that stopped at its first letter. Luxury against ruin, the Bible velvet, gilt still glinting, the locket silver, polished even as the body decayed, the ribbon silk, threadbare but soft. They survived. He did not. This has been the war's story again and again. A silver spoon unearthed in Virginia, initials blurred. A ring cut from a hand at Chickamauga. A watch stopped at midnight. A child's drum shattered by musket ball. A letter sealed in tin at Sharpsburg, unread. A scorched Bible from Petersburg. Objects endure. Names vanish. The ledgers prove it. At Andersonville, names crossed out. At Elmira, rations listed for men long dead. In USCT rolls, whole pages filled with X's. In cemeteries, stones marked only unknown. Mystery repeats. The linen scrap, J, first miss. The bugle scratched, only H. The Bible inscribed, to my son, with no name. The letter half burned, beginning, to my dearest, ending in ash. Always initials, always fragments, never the full name. Imagine standing in that ravine, the grass tall, the earth damp. You lift the Bible, gilt dulled but faintly gold. You hold the locket, clasp stiff but still closed. You touch the ribbon, letter J glimmering in silk, and then nothing more. No ledger will finish the line. No diary will restore the voice. The silence is all that remains. But silence itself is history. It is the ledger we inherit, velvet stained, silver dulled, silk embroidered, absence preserved. The Civil War left battles, numbers, speeches, but beneath them it left fragments, velvet Bibles, silver lockets, watches, drums, letters, buttons, each one unfinished. We cannot name them all, but we can remember them as they are. The locket is not about who, it is about what war does. It takes names, leaves initials, takes voices, leaves silence, takes lives, leaves objects. This is the story of J, not a name, not a regiment, not a grave, only a Bible, a locket, a ribbon, and through them, a ledger. The snow melted in 1863. The ravine gave up a body, and with him, a story that will never end. This is history's ledger. The war is finished. The names are not. Would you have written your name inside the Bible or left the page blank? Tell me below. Like, comment, subscribe, so we can keep turning the pages together. And on the next page of the ledger, the battlefields fall silent, but another truth emerges. Most men did not die with muskets in hand. They died before the fighting even began. From fever to flux, from lice to hunger, disease was the greater enemy. Join us for our next story. What new research reveals about Revolutionary War hunger.